The blood-red sunset painted the Arizona sky as Sarah Kincaid stood at the edge of Eden's Creek, a small, bustling town nestled in the shadow of the Superstition Mountains, her life crumbling around her like the dry desert sand beneath her feet. The year was 1876, and at 22 years of age, Sarah found herself utterly alone, clutching a small bundle of possessions and the weight of her family's condemnation. "You've brought shame upon this family." Her father's words still rang in her ears, his voice trembling with righteous fury as he'd stood on the porch of their modest home, the same porch where she had played as a child. "No daughter of mine will carry a child out of wedlock. You are no longer welcome in this house or this family." Her mother had wept silently, not daring to contradict her husband, while Sarah's younger siblings watched wide-eyed from behind the curtains. The town minister, Pastor Williams, had stood beside her father, nodding his solemn approval of her banishment. 3 months pregnant and utterly alone, Sarah had nowhere to go. The father of her unborn child, a traveling salesman who had promised her the world only to disappear with the morning dew, was long gone. Her crime was unforgivable in the eyes of Eden's Creek's God-fearing community. Even those who had called themselves her friends now averted their eyes when she passed. Sarah clutched her small satchel tighter as she walked along the dusty road leading out of town. The stagecoach depot was still a mile ahead, and she had just enough money for a one-way ticket to wherever fate would take her. The late September heat beat down upon her shoulders, making the journey feel twice as long, her condition adding to her exhaustion. As she rounded the bend, the silhouette of a man on horseback appeared on the horizon. Sarah tensed. Lone women on isolated roads were vulnerable, and she had nothing to defend herself with but her wits. She considered stepping off the road to hide among the sparse desert brush, but the rider had already spotted her. The man brought his horse to a stop a respectful distance away. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair curled beneath the brim of his hat, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a face that was neither handsome nor plain but carried a quiet strength. "Afternoon, miss," he said, his deep voice carrying a gentle southern lilt. "You shouldn't be out here alone. There's a storm brewing." He nodded toward the distant mountains where dark clouds were gathering. Sarah lifted her chin defiantly. "I'm leaving town, sir. I have no choice in the matter." The man studied her for a long moment, taking in her travel-worn appearance and the protective way she held her arm across her midsection. "The name's Isaiah Tanner," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks call me Ike. I own a cattle ranch about 10 miles north of here." "Where are you headed?" "Anywhere but here," Sarah replied, her voice breaking despite her attempt at bravery. "Eden's Creek no longer has a place for me." Understanding dawned in his eyes as they flickered briefly to her waistline. Instead of judgment, Sarah saw something unexpected: compassion. "I'm heading to Snake River," he said. "It's a small settlement in the Northern Territory. Good people there, mostly miners and ranchers. They don't ask too many questions about a person's past." Sarah hesitated. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Tanner, but I'll be fine on my own." A fat raindrop landed on Sarah's cheek, followed by another. Within seconds, the heavens opened and rain began to pour down in sheets. "Miss," Ike called over the sudden downpour, "you'll catch your death out here." "My ranch is the closest shelter for miles. I can offer you a dry place to stay tonight, and tomorrow I can take you to the stagecoach depot if you still wish to leave." Sarah weighed her options as the rain soaked through her dress. Her condition made her vulnerable to illness, and she had her unborn child to consider. With reluctance born of necessity, she nodded. Ike dismounted in one fluid motion and approached her slowly, as one might approach a spooked horse. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her satchel. Sarah relinquished her bag, and he secured it to his saddle before helping her mount his horse. He climbed up behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance as he guided the animal through the intensifying storm. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, the rain eventually subsiding to a gentle drizzle. As they crested a hill, Sarah saw a sprawling ranch house nestled in a valley, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth within. "Welcome to the Lazy Tea," Ike said as they approached. "It's not much, but it's home." Not much was an understatement. The ranch was substantial, with a well-maintained two-story main house painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. A wide porch wrapped around the front, dotted with rocking chairs and potted plants. It was a far cry from the modest home Sarah had shared with her family in town. As they dismounted, the front door opened, and an elderly woman emerged, wiping her hands on an apron. "Isaiah Tanner, you're dripping all over my clean porch," she scolded, though her eyes twinkled with affection. Her gaze shifted to Sarah, curiosity evident. "And who might this be, Mrs. Abigail Porter, meet Miss?" "Sarah," she supplied, realizing she hadn't offered her name. "Sarah Kincaid." "Miss Kincaid was caught in the storm," Ike explained. "I offered her shelter for the night." Mrs. Porter's shrewd eyes took in Sarah's bedraggled appearance and the slight curve of her belly that her wet dress now did little to conceal. To Sarah's surprise, the woman's expression softened. "Well, don't just stand there catching pneumonia. Come inside, child. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread in the oven." The interior of the ranch house was as welcoming as its exterior suggested. Polished wood floors, comfortable furniture, and walls adorned with paintings created a sense of home that made Sarah's heart ache for what she had lost. Mrs. Porter, who Sarah learned was Ike's housekeeper and had been with his family since he was a boy, ushered her upstairs to a guest room with a copper bathtub that she promptly filled with steaming water. "You soak the chill out of your bones," the older woman instructed. "I'll find you some dry clothes. They may be a bit large, but they'll do until yours are laundered." Left alone, Sarah sank gratefully into the warm water, letting the heat soothe her aching muscles. Tears mingled with the bathwater as the events of the day crashed over her. She had lost everything: her family, her home, her place in the community, all because she had believed in love and promises that proved as substantial as morning mist. After her bath, dressed in a borrowed nightgown and robe, Sarah found her way downstairs to the kitchen where Mrs. Porter was ladling stew into bowls. "Ah, there you are," the housekeeper said cheerfully. "Feeling better?" Sarah nodded, though better was a relative term. She was cleaner, warmer, and momentarily safe, but her future remained as uncertain as ever. "Mr. Tanner had to check on the cattle," Mrs. Porter explained, setting a bowl before Sarah. "The storm spooked them. He'll join us shortly." As if summoned by her words, the back door opened, and Ike entered, having changed into dry clothes himself. His presence filled the room, not in an intimidating way but with a quiet steadiness that Sarah found oddly comforting. "Miss Kincaid," he acknowledged with a nod. "I trust you're more comfortable now." "Yes, thank you," Sarah replied, suddenly shy under his direct gaze. "Your home is lovely." Ike's smile transformed his face, revealing dimples that softened his rugged features. "Thank Mrs. Porter for that. Left to my own devices, I'd probably live in the barn with the horses." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. "If I may ask," Ike said finally, "what brings you to leave Eden's Creek so suddenly?" It's not my business, I know, but if you're in some kind of trouble. Sarah set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly gone. My family has disowned me, she said, the words scraping her throat like broken glass. I am with child and there is no husband. In their eyes and in the eyes of the town, I am beyond redemption. She expected disgust, perhaps even a request for her to leave, but instead, Ike's expression darkened with anger, not at her, she realized, but on her behalf. And the father? He asked quietly. Gone, Sarah replied simply. He was passing through town, selling farm equipment. He spoke of marriage, of a life together in St. Louis. I believed him. She laughed bitterly. I was a fool. Mrs. Porter made a sympathetic clucking noise. You wouldn't be the first girl to be taken in by a silver tongue, nor will you be the last. It's not your folly that's the sin, but his abandonment. Ike was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table. The stage coach to Snake River leaves tomorrow at noon, he said finally. If you like, I can take you there. Snake River is a 3-day journey from here. It's a growing town with opportunities for those willing to work hard. Why would you help me? Sarah asked, suspicion edging into her voice. Kind as he seemed, experience had taught her that men rarely offered assistance without expecting something in return. Ike's eyes met hers directly. Because 25 years ago, my mother found herself in a similar situation. A widow with a small child and another on the way, she was shunned by her community. A kind stranger helped her when no one else would. I'm merely passing on the favor. Sarah felt something shift inside her at his words, not quite trust, but perhaps the possibility of it. I can pay for my passage, she said, her pride still intact despite everything. I have some money saved. Keep your money, Ike advised. You'll need it to establish yourself. Consider this a loan if your pride requires it. You can repay me when you're settled. Later that night, lying in the most comfortable bed she had slept in since leaving home, Sarah stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain patter against the window. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she felt a glimmer of hope. Snake River might offer the fresh start she desperately needed. Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. Sarah dressed in her now clean clothes, packed her meager belongings, and joined Ike and Mrs. Porter for breakfast. I've packed you some food for the journey, Mrs. Porter said, handing Sarah a cloth-wrapped bundle. Biscuits, cheese, and dried apples. It's not much, but it'll tide you over. Ike appeared in the doorway, dressed for travel. The wagon's ready when you are, Miss Kincaid. Sarah thanked Mrs. Porter for her kindness and followed Ike outside where a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses waited. The drive to town was pleasant. The desert landscape washed clean by the rain, wildflowers bobbing their heads in the gentle breeze. Mr. Tanner, Sarah began hesitantly, may I ask you something personal? Ike glanced at her, one eyebrow raised in curiosity. You may ask, I may choose not to answer. You mentioned your mother was a widow with children. What became of her, and your father, if I may ask? Ike's expression softened. My father was a soldier in the Mexican-American War. He died when I was 4. My mother remarried a few years later to a man who seemed kind at first, but showed his true nature after the wedding. When she found herself carrying my half-sister, he abandoned her, claiming the child couldn't be his. His jaw tightened at the memory. We moved west after that, eventually settling here. She built this ranch from nothing, raised us both, and became one of the most respected women in the territory before she passed 5 years ago. Sarah absorbed this information, understanding better now why he had offered her help. And your sister? Rebecca lives in Santa Fe with her husband and 3 children. She's a school teacher. Pride colored his voice. She visits when she can. They reached the stagecoach depot just as the coach was being prepared for departure. Ike helped Sarah down from the wagon and carried her satchel to the ticket counter. "One passage to Snake River," he told the clerk, placing coins on the counter before Sarah could protest. The clerk's eyes darted between them, lingering momentarily on Sarah's midsection. His lips pursed in judgment. "Something wrong with the lady's money?" Ike asked, his voice deceptively casual but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "No, sir, Mr. Tanner," the clerk stammered, quickly counting the coins. "Leaving in 10 minutes. Better board now to get a good seat." As they walked to the waiting coach, Sarah touched Ike's arm. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Tanner. I don't know how I can repay your kindness." Ike studied her face for a long moment. "You know," he said slowly, as if the thought had just occurred to him, "I've been thinking about your situation. Snake River is a good town, but it's still rough. A woman alone, especially in your condition." He trailed off, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "What are you suggesting?" Sarah asked. Ike removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Kincaid. My ranch is prosperous, but it lacks a woman's touch. Mrs. Porter is getting on in years and talks of moving to Santa Fe to be near her sister. I find myself in need of a housekeeper, and you find yourself in need of a safe place to live and work." Sarah stared at him in shock. "You would hire me, knowing my situation? Your situation, as you call it, is your business. All I care about is whether you can cook, clean, and help maintain a household. The position includes room and board for you and your child, a modest salary, and the respect due to any employee of the Lazy T." Sarah's mind raced. The offer was unexpected but not unwelcome. The Lazy T seemed a peaceful place, and Ike Tanner had shown himself to be honorable. Still, caution prevailed. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Tanner, but I barely know you. How can I be sure your intentions are proper?" Ike's eyes crinkled at the corners, not in offense but in understanding. "A fair concern. You would have your own quarters, completely private. Mrs. Porter would remain until after your child is born to ensure propriety. If at any time you feel uncomfortable, I will personally escort you to Snake River or any other destination of your choice, with 3 months' wages in advance." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. "I took the liberty of drawing up a simple contract outlining these terms. You're welcome to review it and make any changes you feel necessary." Sarah accepted the paper with trembling fingers. The terms were exactly as he had stated, generous even. It was more than fair, it was a lifeline. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ike's expression grew serious. "Because 20 years ago, someone gave my mother a chance when the rest of the world had turned its back on her. Because I believe that one mistake shouldn't define a person's entire life. Because the way your community has treated you is wrong, and I have the means to offer an alternative." He paused, meeting her gaze directly. "And because I could use the help. It's as simple and as complicated as that." Sarah took a deep breath, weighing her options. Snake River was an unknown, a gamble that might end in heartbreak or worse. The Lazy T, for all that it represented a risk of its own kind, offered security, respect, and the chance to provide for her child. "I accept your offer, Mr. Tanner," she said finally. "But I want to add one condition to your contract. Name it. If at any point you regret this decision or find my presence problematic, you will tell me directly. No polite fictions, no gentle dismissals. I've had enough deception to last a lifetime." Ike nodded solemnly. "You have my word." He extended his hand. Sarah hesitated only briefly before shaking it, sealing their agreement. His palm was calloused but warm against hers, his grip firm without being overpowering. As they returned to the wagon, Leaving the stagecoach to depart without her, Sarah felt a curious lightness. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she had made a choice rather than having circumstances dictated to her. Whether it was the right choice remained to be seen, but it was hers, and that alone gave her a measure of peace. The return journey to the Lazy T passed quickly, filled with practical conversation about her duties and the running of the ranch. By the time they arrived, Sarah had a clearer picture of what her new life would entail, and it seemed far more promising than anything Snake River might have offered. Mrs. Porter greeted their return with raised eyebrows but no questions, merely nodding when Ike explained the new arrangement. "Well then," the older woman said pragmatically, "we'd best get your room properly set up. Not the guest room that's too far from the necessary facilities for a woman in your condition. The blue room at the end of the hall would be more suitable, with its attached washroom." As Mrs. Porter led her upstairs, Sarah caught Ike watching them, an unreadable expression on his face. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had she made a terrible mistake, placing her trust in yet another man she barely knew? But as Mrs. Porter showed her the spacious, sunlit room that would be hers, pointing out the lockable door and private bathroom luxuries Sarah had never experienced, she began to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, fortune had finally smiled upon her. "Mr. Tanner is a good man, Mrs. Porter said as she helped Sarah unpack her few belongings. "His mother raised him right. You've nothing to fear under this roof." "You don't think less of me?" Sarah couldn't help asking. "For my condition." Mrs. Porter paused in her task, fixing Sarah with a kind but direct gaze. "Child, in my 70 years, I've seen enough of life to know that there's no person walking this earth who hasn't stumbled in some fashion. Some stumbles are just more visible than others, is all. The good Lord judges the heart, not the belly." With those words, Sarah felt something within her begin to heal a small crack in the wall of shame that had surrounded her since her family's rejection. The following weeks established a routine that brought unexpected comfort to Sarah's life. She rose early each morning, helped Mrs. Porter prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, then set about her duties laundering, mending, cleaning, and learning the intricacies of running a large household from the older woman, who was proving to be both a patient teacher and a kind friend. Ike was often absent during daylight hours, occupied with the demands of the ranch. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a respectful distance, true to his word that her position would be proper in every respect. As September gave way to October and her pregnancy became more pronounced, Sarah found herself settling into life at the Lazy T with surprising ease. The ranch hands, initially curious about her presence, quickly accepted her as part of the household, tipping their hats respectfully when they saw her and complimenting her cooking with genuine enthusiasm. One crisp autumn evening, as Sarah sat on the front porch shelling peas, she heard the now familiar sound of Ike's horse approaching. He dismounted gracefully, speaking softly to the animal before approaching the house. "Evening, Miss Kincaid," he greeted her, removing his hat as he climbed the porch steps. "Those peas from the kitchen garden," Sarah nodded. "Mrs. Porter says they're the last of the season. We'll have them with dinner tonight." Ike settled into the rocking chair beside her, a respectful distance between them. "You've been with us nearly a month now. Are you finding everything to your satisfaction?" "More than satisfactory, Mr. Tanner," Sarah replied honestly. "Your home is lovely and the work is rewarding. Mrs. Porter has been very kind in showing me how things are done. And your health?" His eyes briefly dropped to her growing belly before returning respectfully to her face. "Good, thank you. The morning sickness has finally passed." Ike nodded, seeming pleased. I've been meaning to ask, do you have any experience with bookkeeping? The ranch accounts need organizing, and I confess it's not my strongest skill. Sarah brightened. Actually, I do. My father was a shopkeeper. I helped with his ledgers from the time I was 15. Would you be willing to take on that responsibility as well? I'd adjust your compensation accordingly. I'd be happy to, Sarah agreed, touched by his confidence in her abilities. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the creak of the rocking chairs and the rhythmic popping of pea pods. "May I ask you something personal, Miss Kincaid?" Ike finally said. Sarah tensed slightly but nodded. "You miss your family?" The question caught her off guard. She had been determinedly not thinking about her parents, her younger brothers and sisters, the home that had been hers since birth. "Yes," she admitted softly. "Despite everything I do, they were. They are good people in many ways. My father is strict but fair. My mother is kind, though she's always deferred to my father in all things. My siblings." Her voice caught. "My youngest sister, Esther, is only 6. I wonder if she'll even remember me as she grows." Ike's expression was compassionate. "Family ties run deep, even when stretched or broken." "Have you considered writing to them?" Sarah shook her head emphatically. "My father made it clear I am dead to them now. Any communication from me would only reopen wounds." "Perhaps," Ike acknowledged. "Or perhaps time has softened their stance. Not all storms last forever, Miss Kincaid." His words lodged in her heart, planting a seed of hope she hadn't allowed herself to nurture. "What of your family?" she asked, turning the conversation away from herself. "You mentioned your sister in Santa Fe, but have you no one else?" A shadow crossed Ike's face. "No living parents." "My mother passed 5 years ago, as I mentioned. My stepfather, my sister's father, died in a mining accident when I was 15. There are cousins scattered across Texas and Missouri, but we've lost touch over the years. No wife, no children." The question slipped out before Sarah could consider its propriety. To her relief, Ike didn't seem offended. "I was engaged once, about 7 years ago. Caroline was a banker's daughter from Tucson. Beautiful, educated, everything a man could want in a wife." His expression grew distant. "Or so I thought, until I discovered she had a pronounced distaste for ranch life and an equally pronounced fondness for my foreman." "I'm sorry," Sarah said sincerely. Ike shrugged, though the set of his shoulders suggested the wound hadn't completely healed. "It was for the best. Better to discover such incompatibilities before marriage than after." Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Porter calling them to dinner. But something had shifted between them, a tentative friendship forming beyond their employer-employee relationship. As autumn deepened into winter, Sarah found herself enjoying Ike's company more and more. Their evenings often ended with them sitting by the fire, Sarah mending or knitting baby clothes while Ike read aloud from one of the many books that lined his study. He had a pleasant voice, deep and expressive, bringing characters to life as he read tales of adventure, history, and occasionally poetry. Her condition advanced, her body changing in ways that sometimes frightened her. Mrs. Porter, who had assisted at many births, reassured her that everything was progressing normally. But the prospect of childbirth without her mother or sisters present filled Sarah with dread. One bitterly cold December night, as wind howled around the eaves of the house, Sarah woke with a sharp pain that made her gasp. Pressing a hand to her swollen belly, she felt it harden beneath her palm. When the sensation passed, she told herself it was nothing more than the false pains Mrs. Porter had warned her about, still weeks away from her time. But when a second pain gripped her less than 15 minutes later, followed by a warm gush of fluid between her legs, Sarah knew with sudden clarity that her child was coming, ready or not. She managed to light the lamp beside her bed and make her way to Mrs. Porter's room down the hall. The older woman took one look at Sarah's pale face and soaked nightgown and sprang into action with surprising agility for her years. "Early but not dangerously so," she declared after helping Sarah change and examining her condition. "I'll wake Mr. Tanner. We'll need hot water and clean linens." Before Sarah could protest, Mrs. Porter had bustled out, returning moments later with a sleepy-looking Ike, his hair tousled and shirt hastily buttoned. "Miss Kincaid," he said, his voice roughened by sleep but his eyes alert with concern. "Mrs. Porter says your time has come." Sarah nodded, unable to speak as another contraction seized her. Ike turned to Mrs. Porter. "Should I ride for the doctor?" The older woman shook her head. "No time, and the weather's too fierce besides. I've delivered more babies than I can count. We'll manage, but I'll need your help." For the next several hours, Sarah existed in a world of pain and effort, each contraction bringing her child closer to the world. Mrs. Porter proved a capable midwife, her weathered hands gentle but firm as she guided Sarah through the process. To Sarah's surprise, Ike remained, heating water, fetching supplies, and offering quiet encouragement. When the pain became unbearable and Sarah cried out that she couldn't continue, it was Ike who took her hand, his strong fingers enveloping hers. "You can do this, Sarah," he said, using her given name for the first time. "You're the strongest woman I know." Somehow his confidence gave her the strength for one more push, and then another until finally, as dawn broke over the eastern horizon, a lusty cry filled the room. "A girl, Mrs. Porter announced triumphantly, cleaning and wrapping the tiny red-faced infant. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Exhausted beyond measure, Sarah could only weep as Mrs. Porter placed the swaddled bundle in her arms. The baby was perfect, 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a shock of dark hair and eyes that, when they briefly fluttered open, were the deep blue of all newborns. "She's beautiful," Ike said softly, standing at the bedside, his expression one of wonder. "What will you call her?" Sarah looked down at her daughter's face, seeing in it all the hope and possibility that had seemed lost to her just months before. "Grace," she decided, "because that's what she is, a gift of grace." After ensuring both mother and child were comfortable, Mrs. Porter shooed Ike from the room. "Go get some rest," she instructed him, "and tell the men they have a new little lady to welcome to the ranch." The days following Grace's birth passed in a blur of exhaustion, joy, and adjustment for Sarah. The tiny being who depended entirely on her was both terrifying and wonderful. Mrs. Porter was an invaluable help, showing Sarah how to nurse, bathe, and care for her newborn. To Sarah's surprise, Ike took a keen interest in the baby, often stopping by the nursery, a small room adjoining Sarah's that he had furnished with a cradle and rocking chair, to check on them. "She has your eyes," he observed one evening as Sarah rocked Grace to sleep. The baby's eyes had begun to change from newborn blue to a hazel that matched Sarah's own. "And her father's chin, I think," Sarah replied without thinking, then tensed, realizing she had never spoken of Grace's father to Ike. If he noticed her discomfort, he gave no sign. "She's perfect just as she is," he said simply. As winter settled over the ranch, blanketing the landscape in snow, Sarah found herself increasingly grateful for the sanctuary the Lazy T had become. The ranch house was warm and comfortable, the pantry well stocked, and Grace thrived in the peaceful environment. Christmas approached, bringing with it a bittersweet longing for family traditions Sarah had always treasured. To her surprise, Ike and Mrs. Porter threw themselves into holiday preparations with enthusiasm, decorating the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, baking gingerbread, and singing carols in the evenings. On Christmas Eve, after Grace had been fed and settled in her cradle, Ike invited Sarah to join him in the study for a glass of spiced cider. The room was cozy, lit by lamplight and the glow of the fire. A small pine tree stood in the corner, adorned with paper stars and strings of cranberries that Sarah and Mrs. Porter had made. "I have something for you," Ike said, reaching into his desk drawer and withdrawing a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "Oh," Sarah said, flustered. "I didn't expect. I haven't prepared anything for you." Ike smiled, the firelight catching the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "You've given this house life again, Sarah. That's gift enough. This is just a small token." Sarah carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she found it was a journal, its pages blank and waiting. "For your thoughts," Ike explained. "Mrs. Porter mentioned you used to enjoy writing." "I did," Sarah admitted, touched that he had noticed such a small detail about her. "Thank you, it's perfect." She ran her fingers over the soft leather, noticing a small inscription on the inside cover. For Sarah, that she might write her own story, with admiration, Isaiah. "There's something else," Ike said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. He withdrew an envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. Inside was a letter written in Ike's neat, strong hand, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Kincaid of Eden's Creek. "I thought," he said carefully, "that if you wished to reach out to your family, a letter from me explaining your current situation might ease the way. As your employer, I could vouch for your character and well-being. It might make it easier for them to respond without losing face." Sarah stared at the letter, emotions warring within her: hope, fear, gratitude, and an unexpected surge of affection for this man who understood so well what she needed without her having to ask. "You would do that for me," she whispered. "I would do a great deal more than that for you, Sarah," Ike replied, his voice dropping to match hers. "If you would permit it." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Sarah became acutely aware of how alone they were, of the firelight playing across Ike's strong features, of how his gaze held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, she thought he might lean forward and kiss her. Instead, he cleared his throat and sat back, the moment passing like a cloud over the sun. "It's getting late," he said, his voice returning to its usual measured tone. "You should get some rest. Grace will likely be up with the dawn." Sarah nodded, clutching the journal and letter to her chest as she rose. "Thank you, Ike, for everything." His smile warmed her more than the fire. "Merry Christmas, Sarah." That night, as she lay in bed listening to Grace's soft breathing from the cradle beside her, Sarah allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been trying to deny for weeks: she was falling in love with Isaiah Tanner. The realization terrified her. She had trusted her heart once before, with disastrous consequences. To risk it again, especially with a man who was her employer and benefactor, seemed foolish beyond measure. And yet, in the quiet of the night, with snow falling softly outside her window, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, he might be developing feelings for her as well. Christmas Day dawned clear and bright, the world outside transformed into a glittering wonderland. After breakfast, during which Ike presented Mrs. Porter with a beautiful woolen shawl from Santa Fe and Grace with a tiny silver rattle, he announced his intention to take Sarah and the baby for a sleigh ride. "If you're feeling up to it," he added. "The doctor said you're healing well, but I don't want to overtire you." Dr. Peterson, a gruff but kind man from the nearest town, had ridden out to check on Sarah and Grace as soon as the weather permitted after the birth. He had pronounced both mother and child in excellent health, complimenting Mrs. Porter on her midwifery skills. "I'd love a sleigh ride," Sarah said, eager to leave the house after being confined for nearly a month. "Let me bundle Grace properly." The sleigh was a beautiful conveyance, polished wood with red runners and bells that jingled merrily as the horses trotted through the snow. Ike had filled it with warm blankets, and Sarah nestled Grace against her chest, the baby's face protected from the cold by a knitted cap and the shelter of her mother's cloak. They glided across the pristine landscape, Ike pointing out landmarks of the ranch that were transformed by their winter covering. Despite the cold, Sarah felt warm inside and out, watching Ike's animated expressions as he spoke of his land and his plans for its future. "In the spring, I'm thinking of expanding the orchard," he told her, gesturing toward a sloping field. "Apples mostly, but perhaps some peach and pear trees as well. What do you think?" "I think it's a wonderful idea," Sarah replied. "There's nothing like fresh fruit and misses. Porter's preserves are exceptional. Have you considered cherries as well? They make excellent pies." Ike grinned. "Cherries it is, then. I'm partial to cherry pie myself." They continued their tour, eventually stopping at a small frozen pond where Ike spread a blanket on a fallen log and produced a thermos of hot chocolate and some of Mrs. Porter's gingerbread. As they sat side by side, sharing this simple meal in the winter sunshine, Sarah felt a contentment she had never expected to find again. Grace slept peacefully in her arms, her tiny face relaxed in the absolute trust of infancy. "She looks like you when she sleeps," Ike observed. "That little furrow between the eyebrows." Sarah touched her own forehead self-consciously. "Do I frown in my sleep?" "Not frown exactly. More like you're pondering great thoughts even in dreams." His smile was teasing but gentle. Sarah laughed, surprised by how easy it felt to be with him, how natural. "I doubt my thoughts are very great. Mostly I worry about ordinary things, whether Grace is warm enough, whether the bread will rise properly, whether the accounts are in order." "Those are great thoughts," Ike countered. "The everyday concerns that keep life moving forward. Without them, what would be the point of the grander ideas?" His philosophy struck Sarah as both practical and profound, much like the man himself. "Have you given any thought to my offer?" Ike asked after a moment. "About writing to your family," Sarah nodded slowly. "I have. I think I would like to try. Even if they don't respond, at least I will know I made the attempt. Would you like me to post it when I go to town next week?" "Yes, please." Sarah looked down at Grace, sleeping innocently. "They should know they have a granddaughter at least. Whether they choose to acknowledge her is their decision." Ike's hand covered hers briefly, a warm pressure that conveyed understanding without words. Family is complicated, but blood ties have a way of asserting themselves given time. The sleigh ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the house, Sarah noticed several horses tethered at the hitching post that hadn't been there when they left. "Are you expecting visitors?" she asked, suddenly conscious of her informal attire and the baby in her arms, visible evidence of her fall from Grace. Ike's expression clouded. "No, but I recognize those horses. The black mare belongs to Pastor Williams from Eden's Creek." Sarah's heart seemed to stop. "Pastor Williams? Here?" "But how, why, I don't know," Ike said grimly, "but we'll find out." He helped her from the sleigh, his hand lingering protectively at her elbow. "You don't have to see them if you don't wish to," he told her quietly. "I can send them away." Sarah straightened her shoulders, adjusting Grace more securely in her arms. "No, whatever they've come to say, I'll hear it. I'm not ashamed of my daughter." Ike's eyes warmed with approval. "Then we'll face them together." They entered the house to find Mrs. Porter serving coffee to 3 visitors in the parlor. Pastor Williams, his thin face as severe as Sarah remembered. a middle-aged man with a familiar stern countenance that made Sarah's heart clench, and a woman whose careworn face bore such a resemblance to Sarah's own that there could be no mistaking her identity. "Mother," Sarah whispered, frozen in the doorway. "Father." Mrs. Kincaid rose shakily to her feet, her eyes fixed on the bundle in Sarah's arms. "Sarah," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. Mr. Kincaid remained seated, his expression unreadable. "We received word you were here," he said stiffly. "From Mrs. Peterson, the doctor's wife. She's my cousin's daughter, as you know." Sarah hadn't known the connection, but she nodded, too stunned to speak. "Mr. and Mrs. Kincaid arrived this morning, Mrs. Porter explained, her tone suggesting she wasn't entirely pleased with the unexpected guests. Pastor Williams accompanied them as a spiritual advisor. The silence that followed was thick with tension until Grace, disturbed by the stillness or perhaps sensing her mother's distress, began to fuss. The tiny sound broke the tableau. "May I?" Mrs. Kincaid began, then faltered, looking uncertainly at her husband. "May I see the child?" Before Mr. Kincaid could respond, Ike stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Kincaid, Pastor Williams, I'm Isaiah Tanner, the owner of this ranch. Your daughter has been in my employ as housekeeper for these past months, a position she has filled with exceptional skill and integrity. Her daughter, Grace, was born here in early December, a healthy and beautiful child, as you can see." His formal introduction seemed to ease some of the awkwardness, providing a framework for this difficult reunion. "May I offer you refreshments after your journey?" he continued smoothly. "Mrs. Porter has prepared a fine Christmas dinner that we would be honored to share with you." Pastor Williams cleared his throat. "We did not come to socialize, Mr. Tanner. We came to discuss a matter of grave moral concern." Ike's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "All the same, Pastor, I insist on offering hospitality on this holy day. Sarah, perhaps you would like to show your mother to your quarters where you might have some privacy. Mrs. Porter can show Mr. Kincaid and Pastor Williams to the dining room." Sarah shot him a grateful look, recognizing the strategy that would separate her hostile father and the pastor from her more sympathetic mother. Once in the nursery adjoining her bedroom, Sarah hesitantly offered Grace to her mother. Mrs. Kincaid took the baby with practiced ease, her eyes drinking in every detail of her granddaughter's face. "She looks like you did," the older woman said softly. "Same chin, same eyes." Sarah nodded, throat tight with unshed tears. "She's a good baby. Rarely cries except when she's hungry or needs changing." Mrs. Kincaid touched Grace's cheek with a gentle finger. "Sarah, we thought. When you disappeared, we feared the worst. Your father forbade us to speak your name, but the little ones ask for you. Esther cries for you at night sometimes." The mention of her youngest sister broke the dam of Sarah's composure. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I've missed you all so much," she confessed. "But Father made it clear I was no longer welcome." Her mother's eyes, so like her own, filled with matching tears. He was angry, hurt. "Our standing in the community. But when Mrs. Peterson mentioned seeing you here, alive and well with a child," she swallowed hard. "I insisted we come. Your father opposed it, but for once I stood firm." This small act of defiance from her usually acquiescent mother surprised and touched Sarah deeply. "And Pastor Williams?" she asked. Mrs. Kincaid's expression soured slightly. "He invited himself along, to offer guidance," he said. She turned her attention back to Grace, who had fallen asleep in her grandmother's arms. "She's perfect, Sarah. Whatever circumstances brought her into this world, she is innocent and perfect." "Yes," Sarah agreed, relief washing through her at her mother's acceptance of the child. "That's what Mr. Tanner said as well. He seems like a good man," Mrs. Kincaid observed, a question in her tone. "He is," Sarah confirmed. "He offered me employment when I had nowhere else to go, no references, no prospects. He's been nothing but kind and respectful." Her mother studied her face closely. "And is that all he is to you? An employer?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Mrs. Kincaid's voice was gentle but knowing. "I saw the way he looked at you and the way you looked at him." Before Sarah could formulate a response, a knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Porter poked her head in. "Dinner is served," she announced. "And I thought you might like to know, Miss Sarah, that Mr. Tanner is currently engaging your father and the pastor in a most interesting theological discussion about forgiveness and the true meaning of Christian charity." Sarah couldn't help but smile at the mischievous twinkle in Mrs. Porter's eye. "We'll be right there." The dining room was a study in controlled tension when they arrived. Pastor Williams sat rigidly in his chair, his thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. Mr. Kincaid looked uncomfortable but less hostile than Sarah had expected. Ike rose as they entered, pulling out chairs for Sarah and her mother with easy courtesy. Grace, still sleeping, was settled in her cradle, which had been brought into the dining room for the occasion. The Christmas dinner that followed was unlike any Sarah had experienced. Mrs. Porter had outdone herself with roast goose, savory stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy, fresh rolls, cranberry sauce, and winter vegetables from the root cellar, followed by mince pies and plum pudding. Conversation was stilted at first, with Ike carrying much of the burden by discussing neutral topics such as the weather and the price of cattle. Gradually, however, Mr. Kincaid began to respond with more than monosyllables, particularly when Ike asked knowledgeable questions about the mercantile business. It was during dessert that Pastor Williams finally addressed the elephant in the room. "Miss Kincaid," he said, setting down his fork with deliberate precision, "your situation is most irregular. To be living under the roof of an unmarried man, regardless of the presence of Mrs. Porter as chaperone, is highly improper. It places both your soul and Mr. Tanner's in jeopardy." Sarah tensed, but before she could respond, Ike spoke. "With all due respect, Pastor, I disagree. The Bible speaks far more often of kindness, charity, and not casting the first stone than it does of propriety. Sarah is my employee, nothing more, though I hold her in the highest esteem. There has been no impropriety under my roof." Pastor Williams's nostrils flared. The appearance of impropriety is often as damaging as impropriety itself. A young, unwed mother living in the home of a bachelor will inevitably cause talk, no matter how innocent the arrangement. "Perhaps in a small town like Eden's Creek," Ike countered smoothly. "But here, my neighbors are concerned with surviving harsh winters and managing their own affairs, not gossiping about mine." "Nevertheless," the pastor persisted, "for the sake of Miss Kincaid's reputation, what remains of it, and for the future of her child, a more suitable arrangement should be made." Mr. Kincaid cleared his throat. "That is why we have come," he said, addressing Sarah directly for the first time. "Your mother has persuaded me that perhaps I was too harsh in my judgment." The admission seemed to cost him considerable effort. "We are prepared to take you and the child back to Eden's Creek, where you might live in the rooms above the store. It would not be the same as before, but you would have a roof over your head and your family nearby." Sarah stared at her father in astonishment. This grudging offer was more than she had ever expected from him. And yet, the thought of returning to Eden's Creek, to the whispers and judgmental stares, to living as a fallen woman dependent on her father's reluctant charity, filled her with dread. Before she could formulate a response, Ike spoke again. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Kincaid. But perhaps there is another solution, one that would address Pastor Williams's concerns about propriety while allowing Sarah to maintain the independence she has established here. All eyes turned to him, curious. Ike took a deep breath, then turned to Sarah, his expression serious but with a warmth in his eyes that made her heart skip. "Sarah, I had planned to speak with you privately, but perhaps this is, in its own way, the right moment." He reached across the table to take her hand. "These past months, watching you face adversity with grace and courage, seeing your devotion to your daughter, your intelligence and kindness, I have come to admire you deeply. More than admire, I have come to love you." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Around the table, she was vaguely aware of her mother's small gasp, her father's frown, Pastor Williams's sputtering, but all she could focus on was Ike's steady gaze. "I know this is sudden, and perhaps inappropriate given our current arrangement," he continued. "But if you could find it in your heart to consider me, I would be honored to ask for your hand in marriage. Not out of obligation or to silence gossip, but because I believe we could build a good life together, you, me, and Grace." The world seemed to still around them as Sarah absorbed his words. Marriage, to Ike. The very thing she had secretly begun to dream of but had never dared hope might actually come to pass. "Mr. Tanner," Pastor Williams interjected, breaking the moment, "while your offer might solve the immediate problem of propriety, I must point out that marriage is a sacred covenant, not a convenient solution to a moral dilemma. Moreover, to take on another man's child as your own is exactly what Joseph did when he married Mary," Ike interrupted, his voice firm. "And I would consider it a privilege, not a burden." He turned back to Sarah, who still hadn't found her voice. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer. This is too important a decision to be rushed, but I wanted you to know that the option exists, that there is a future for you here if you want it. A future where you and Grace would be respected, cherished, and loved, not merely tolerated." Sarah finally found her voice. "Ike, perhaps, Mrs. Porter interjected tactfully. "This is a conversation best continued in private. Mr. and Mrs. Kincaid, Pastor Williams, would you care to join me in the parlor for coffee while Mr. Tanner and Miss Kincaid have a moment to themselves?" With some reluctance, the visitors allowed themselves to be shepherded from the dining room, leaving Sarah and Ike alone except for the sleeping baby. "I apologize for the timing," Ike said once they were alone. "It wasn't how I'd planned to ask you. But hearing your father's offer, knowing it would take you away from here from me, I couldn't stay silent." Sarah studied his face, searching for any sign of doubt or obligation. She found none, only earnest affection and a hint of vulnerability that touched her deeply. "You truly want to marry me?" "Knowing everything about my past, about Grace's father, I want to marry you because of everything I know about you, Sarah. Your past is part of what shaped you into the woman I love, and Grace is a blessing I would be honored to help raise." He took both her hands in his. "I'm not offering out of pity or duty. I'm offering because the thought of this house without you in it is unbearable, because you've brought light and life back into my world, because I believe we could be happy together." Sarah felt tears well in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I never thought I would trust a man again after what happened. I was so certain my heart was permanently damaged. But you—" She squeezed his hands. "You showed me kindness when I needed it most, respect when others offered only judgment, and a path forward when I could see none. How could I not love you for that?" Ike's eyes widened. "You love me," Sarah laughed softly. "Is that so surprising? You're a good man, Isaiah Tanner, the best I've ever known. Yes, I love you, and yes, if you're certain this is what you want, I would be honored to become your wife." The smile that lit Ike's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, He leaned forward and kissed her a gentle, reverent kiss that promised both passion and respect. When they separated, both a little breathless, Ike rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably go talk to your family," he murmured. "And I should formally ask your father for your hand, though I suspect his blessing may not be enthusiastically given." Sarah nodded, though she was reluctant to leave this moment of perfect understanding between them. "He may surprise you. My father values honesty and hard work above all else. Once he sees that you possess both in abundance, he may be more accepting than we expect." Hand in hand, they went to face her family. As Sarah had predicted, her father was initially skeptical of Ike's intentions, but as the afternoon wore on and he observed the ranch, its operations, and the evident respect the hands had for their boss, his resistance began to soften. By evening, when the visitors prepared to depart, having declined Ike's offer to stay the night due to Pastor Williams's insistence on returning to Eden's Creek, a tentative truce had been established. Mr. Kincaid had given his grudging consent to the marriage. Mrs. Kincaid had extracted a promise from Sarah to write regularly and bring Grace for visits when weather permitted, and even Pastor Williams had been somewhat mollified by the prospect of a proper wedding ceremony, which he offered to perform himself. "Not necessary, Pastor," Ike said smoothly. "We have a fine minister in Snake River who has already agreed to officiate, but we would be honored if you would attend as a guest." As the Kincaid's wagon disappeared down the snow-covered lane, Ike put his arm around Sarah's waist. "Are you all right?" Sarah leaned into his strength, watching the last connection to her old life fade into the distance. "Better than all right," she assured him. "I never imagined this day would end with a reconciliation with my family, however tentative, and an engagement to the man I love. It feels like a miracle." Ike pressed a kiss to her temple. "Do you know what day it is tomorrow?" he asked. Sarah thought for a moment. "December 26th. Why?" "It's the feast of St. Stephen," Ike explained. "In the old tradition, it's a day for giving alms to the poor and extending charity to those in need. It seems fitting, somehow, that we begin our life together on such a day." Sarah turned in his arms to look up at him. "What do you mean?" "I was thinking we might be married tomorrow if you're willing. Mrs. Porter can witness, and we can have a proper church ceremony later when the weather allows travel to Snake River. But I find I'm impatient to call you my wife, and to give Grace my name." Sarah's heart swelled with love for this man who had taken her broken life and helped her forge it into something beautiful and new. "Tomorrow would be perfect," she agreed. They were married the next day in the parlor of the Lazy Tea, Mrs. Porter and the foreman, Mr. Jenkins, serving as witnesses. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, Ike's voice steady as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Sarah all the days of their lives, Sarah's clear and sure as she made the same vows in return. Grace, cradled in Mrs. Porter's arms, slept peacefully through the entire proceedings, unaware that her status in the world had just fundamentally changed. That night, as Sarah prepared for bed in what was now their shared room, she felt a curious mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Her previous experience with physical intimacy had been brief, awkward, and ultimately disappointing, ending in broken promises and abandonment. But Ike was different, patient, considerate, and genuinely concerned for her comfort and happiness. When he joined her, dressed in a nightshirt and robe, his hair damp from washing, he seemed almost as nervous as she was. "We don't have to rush anything," he told her, sitting beside her on the edge of the bed. "I know this is unusual given your recent childbirth and our brief courtship." Sarah reached for his hand, drawing strength from its warmth. "I want to be a true wife to you, Ike, in every way." His smile was tender as he raised her hand to his lips. "And I want to be a true husband to you, but there's no hurry. We have all the time in the world." That night, they simply held each other, Ike's strong arms creating a haven of safety and belonging that Sarah had never known could exist. When Grace woke for her midnight feeding, Ike got up with Sarah, watching with wonder as she nursed the baby, then took his turn walking the floor with the fussy infant until she settled back to sleep. "You're a natural father," Sarah observed as he gently laid Grace back in her cradle. "She makes it easy," Ike replied, though the pride in his voice was unmistakable. "She's extraordinary, just like her mother." In the weeks that followed, they settled into a new rhythm as husband and wife, parents to Grace and partners in running the ranch. Sarah continued to manage the household and accounts, but now with the authority of Mrs. Tanner rather than as an employee. The ranch hands accepted the change without comment, though Sarah sometimes caught them exchanging knowing glances, suggesting they had anticipated this development long before she had. As winter gave way to spring, Sarah's relationship with her family continued to mend. Her mother visited often, sometimes bringing Sarah's younger siblings who quickly grew to adore their new brother-in-law and tiny niece. Mr. Kincaid's visits were less frequent but gradually became less strained, especially after Ike consulted him on expanding the mercantile side of the ranch's operations. By Grace's first birthday, the transformation in Sarah's life was complete. The frightened, shamed young woman who had stood at the edge of Eden's Creek with nowhere to go had become Mrs. Isaiah Tanner, respected wife of one of the territory's most successful ranchers, mother to a thriving daughter, and mistress of a home filled with love and laughter. On the anniversary of the day Ike had found her on the road, Sarah sat on the porch of the Lazy T, watching her husband teach Grace to toddle across the yard, the little girl's delighted giggles carrying on the warm evening air. Mrs. Porter joined her, settling into the rocking chair with a contented sigh. "Who would have thought a year ago that things would turn out so well?" the older woman mused. "The Lord works in mysterious ways indeed." Sarah smiled, one hand resting on her still flat abdomen where she had recently confirmed another child was growing. "Yes, he does. From shame to joy, from banishment to belonging. I never dreamed such happiness was possible." Mrs. Porter followed her gaze to where Ike now swung Grace high in the air, the little girl's face alight with trust and delight. "He's a good man, your Isaiah. Not many would have done what he did." "What's that?" Sarah asked, though she knew the answer. Mrs. Porter's weathered face softened with affection. "Taken what the world called sin and made it holy again through love. That's what a true man of faith does not condemn, but redeem." As if sensing they were talking about him, Ike looked up, catching Sarah's eye across the yard. His smile, warm and intimate, conveyed all the love and promise that had transformed her life. "Mrs. Tanner," he called, "I believe our daughter would like her mother to join us for a walk before sunset." Sarah rose, her heart full to bursting. "Coming, Mr. Tanner," she replied, stepping down from the porch and into the embrace of the family that had been born, not of convention or obligation, but of love freely given and gratefully received. And as the sun painted the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah Tanner walked toward her future with the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the people she was meant to love. Her journey from shame to redemption was complete. Her sin, if ever it truly was one made holy by the love of a good man and the grace of a God who, it seemed, had been watching over her all along. 10 years later, on a bright spring morning, the Lazy T Ranch was alive with activity. Chickens scratched in the yard, cattle lowed in the distant pastures, and children's laughter rang out from the orchard where apple and cherry trees bloomed in fragrant profusion. Sarah Tanner stood at the kitchen window, watching as her 4 children played among the blossoms. Grace, now 11, her dark hair in braids, was helping her younger siblings collect fallen petals in baskets. 8-year-old James, the spitting image of his father, was attempting to climb a tree while his 6-year-old sister Emma supervised critically. The youngest, 4-year-old Thomas, toddled behind them, determined to keep up with his older siblings. "They're getting so big," Ike observed, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "Seems like just yesterday Grace was learning to walk." Sarah leaned back against his chest, savoring the solid strength of him. "Time passes too quickly," she agreed. "Soon Grace will be a young lady with suitors coming to call." Ike groaned theatrically. "Don't remind me. I'm already planning ways to discourage any young man who isn't worthy of her." Sarah laughed, turning in his arms to face him. The years had added a few strands of silver to his dark hair and fine lines around his eyes, but he was still the handsome, honorable man she had fallen in love with. If anything, the shared experiences of their decade together, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges, had only deepened her affection for him. "I received a letter from Mother yesterday," she told him. "She and Father are planning to visit next month for Grace's birthday." The relationship between Sarah and her parents had healed remarkably over the years. Mr. Kincaid, impressed by Ike's business acumen and integrity, had eventually become not just accepting but genuinely fond of his son-in-law. Mrs. Kincaid doted on her grandchildren and visited often, sometimes staying for weeks at a time. "That's good news," Ike replied. "Your father mentioned last time he was here that he's considering selling the store and retiring. Perhaps we can persuade them to move closer." "I'd like that," Sarah admitted. "Especially for the children. They adore their grandparents." A commotion in the yard drew their attention back to the window. James had apparently succeeded in his climbing attempt and was now stranded on a branch, looking down with a mixture of triumph and alarm. "I'd better go rescue our son before he decides to jump," Ike said with a chuckle, pressing a quick kiss to Sarah's forehead before heading outside. Sarah watched through the window as he approached the tree, speaking calmly to James while positioning himself to catch the boy if he fell. The other children gathered around, offering advice and encouragement. The scene filled her heart with a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was her life now, this ranch, these children, this good man who had seen past her shame to the person she truly was. Ike had kept his promise, making her sin holy again through love and acceptance, creating a family bound by choice as well as blood. As Ike successfully retrieved their son from the tree, hoisting the boy onto his shoulders to the applause of his siblings, Sarah whispered a prayer of gratitude. For second chances and new beginnings, for redemption and grace, for the mysterious workings of providence that had led her, in her darkest hour, to a dusty road where a kind-hearted cowboy had offered her shelter from the storm and, in doing so, had changed the course of both their lives forever. Outside, Ike caught her watching and raised his hand in greeting, his smile as warm and steady as his love. Sarah waved back, then stepped through the door to join her family in the sunshine, her heart full of the simple, profound joy of belonging exactly where she was meant to be.